Lydia Talbot has disappeared, yes. Good heavens. Lydia. Listen, Lou, I called Jim early last night, and he said Margaret Lancaster thinks her father killed Emily. Is that right? Margaret thinks that? You don't mean it, Helen. You can't. No, I don't and can't, she said, with something of her old manner. She may think that, but it isn't true. I know. I was in her room by 10:30, and found her still in traveling clothes and pacing the floor. She was lighting one cigarette after another, and under her makeup she was very white. She hardly greeted me at all. Don't blame poor old Jim for this, she said. I swore him to secrecy, but if he had any guts, but that's neither here nor there. We split on the thing anyhow, and now with old Lydia gone he'll never forgive me. Just what is it all about, Helen? She made a gesture. It's just that I'm a plain damned fool, she said. Things looked black for Jim, and if they found I'd been out that night. What night? Last Sunday night, she said. And finally she told her story. She and Jim had had a difference of some sort, and she had not gone to bed. She was nervous and angry. However that might be, at 1 o'clock or thereabouts, she was not sure of the time, she had gone out to the refrigerator for some soda, and from there to the rear porch. It was a hot night, and for some time she had sat there on a chair staring out over the tennis court and no man's land beyond it. Everything was quiet there, but suddenly she thought she saw a match lighted near the Daltons' garage to her left, a match or a flashlight. It went out in a second or two, but it had interested her, and so she had left the porch and gone along the kitchen path which connects all the houses. She had just reached the end of their own shrubbery when she saw a woman coming from beside the Dalton garage. At first this woman was only a shadowy figure and she remained so until she emerged into the open. Then, by the walk and the heavy outline, Helen decided that it must be either one of our servants or, improbable as it seemed, Emily Lancaster. Whoever it was, she was carrying something. And whatever it was she carried, it seemed to be long and awkward to manage. Helen had followed her quietly. She was quite certain now that it was Emily, and her first horrified idea was that she was carrying an axe. But, and this was something not known before, as she rounded the curve of the walk near the Lancaster house itself she saw that the light was on the kitchen porch, and that although it was Miss Emily, what she carried was a spade. Helen was shocked almost into immobility at the sight. To her it meant only one thing, that after all Emily Lancaster had taken the money and buried it somewhere, and was now about to dig it up. So she kept on after her, making as little noise as she could, and now and then walking along the side of the path for that reason. You see how it was, she explained. You know the sort of heels I wear, and when I heard the news the next morning I knew I'd left a trail about 2 inches deep every here and there. Her suspicions were confirmed when Emily passed the rear of the Lancaster house without stopping, and started on the longish path toward the Talbots. Here was to be the direct proof that Jim was innocent, and she was both excited and thrilled. Then something happened which scared her, as she said, into a fit. There was someone behind them both. She slid into the shrubbery and hid there, with her heart going a million a minute. But after all it turned out to be old Mr. Lancaster, in his bare feet and a dressing gown, coming along at a half-trot, and with his right hand in his dressing gown pocket. Helen had only a second or two to observe him clearly before he too left the light behind. It was long enough, however. If ever I've seen a man mad with fury it was the old gentleman that night, she said. He'd always seemed a mild little man, but he was a raving lunatic just then, and Margaret's right about one thing. There isn't a doubt that he was out to shoot Emily. I suppose he'd been watching her ever since the murder, and that spade settled it. After all, she wasn't his daughter, and he thought she had buried the gold and then killed her mother. Well, I must say it looked like it just then. Helen herself was too scared to think of anything to do. Mr. Lancaster was coming on, and ahead somewhere in the dark was Emily. She stayed in the shrubbery until he had passed, but she was not far behind him when he came to the door of the old stable which was the Talbot garage. For it seemed that Emily had not gone on into the waste land at all. She was inside the Talbot stable, with her spade on the floor beside her, and with a flashlight she seemed to be inspecting a corner behind a barrel. Then Helen, not far behind the old man, saw his hand come out of his pocket and saw that it held a gun. It was a close thing, she said. I don't think Emily ever saw me at all. I had just time to knock the thing out of his hand, and it must have gone a mile. But Emily had heard something, and the poor old thing looked up and saw her stepfather. She looked startled, and neither of them said anything for a minute. Then she braced herself and managed to speak. "I'm sorry I wakened you, father," she said.